Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
5th of August, so I know the expectation is that we will talk about 2 years of the constitutional changes in Jammu and Kashmir. While we were thinking about that, something else has happened. Very major story has broken on the economic front with wide-ranging implications for this moment for the economy and going ahead as well as on India's political economy. So that takes precedence. Doesn't mean that we will not talk about 2 years of the changes in Kashmir. We will do that also. But let's first talk about what has happened with India's economy. That's got us so interested, and frankly, you might even find me smiling quite happily, with a sense of satisfaction because of this. Because what has happened today, to set that up, I have to take you back to my favorite ploy, which could be cricket or some other sport, but no, it is not all of that. It is Hindi cinema music. You know, that's my other favorite ploy. So 1957, there was a film called Ek Saal with Ashok Kumar and Madhubala. And that had lyrics written by Prem Dhawan, music by Ravi. And that had a song, which is a very sad song, which still runs. I think a lot of people still hum it. Plus that line, that mukhda of the song has become a kind of a metaphor. And that was Sab kuch luta ke hosh mein aaye to kya hua. It was sung by Talat Mahmood and also by Lata Mangeshkar. सब कुछ लुटा के होश में आए तो क्या किया. That means if after you've lost everything, you've come to your senses, so what have you gained? Now that is one way of looking at it. But the fact is, in the destiny of nations, in the history of nations, in the history of political economies, a mistake, if the longer it festers, the more damage it does. But if you are still able to correct it, that is to be welcomed. So Modi government today has taken what I consider its most important and most welcome reformist step, not by doing anything, but by undoing something. So 2012, Dada Pranab Mukherjee had passed this toxic amendment to Income Tax Act, whereby he said that Income Tax Act or Income Tax Department can make claims on you almost 60 years retrospectively, almost from 1960-61. That was ridiculous. That was done specifically with one case in the mind. And that case was the Vodafone case. Vodafone has been in the news lately. We saw the letter, that open letter which was released to public, that Kumar Mangalam Bidla, the outgoing chairman of Vodafone Idea, wrote to the government saying that he is willing to give his 27% stake in the company to anybody, including the government. And obviously, government wasn't going to take it from him. So the next day, he did something precipitate. He resigned as the non-executive chairman and non-executive board member of the company. So that it became quite evident that Vodafone Idea was now in deep trouble and on the verge of bankruptcy unless there was a bailout, in the process of which banks will lose a lot of money, because banks have lent a lot of money to the company, and government will lose a lot of money because the company owes the government a lot of money for their user charges. Anyway, how did Vodafone's problem start? Vodafone's problem started when Vodafone initially made its acquisition in India. Remember, before it was Vodafone in India, it was Hutch. Before Hutch, it was Max. It has gone through many avatars, that franchise in India. Max was among the first franchises in India. So in 2007, Vodafone bought Hutchison Whampoa's share. Hutchison Whampoa, that is where the name Hutch came from. It was a Hong Kong company. Now they bought all of Hutchison Whampoa's share, I think about 67% in the company, for $11 billion. In 2007, it was a very big deal. It was also the biggest FDI in India for a long time. $11 billion, big global mega corporation, MNC like Vodafone comes and buys into Indian telecom. Now, it was good for Indian investors. It was good for India's economy. Indian tax department would have thought that it was good for them also. So they thought, all right, you've sold your shares. Hutch or Hutchison Whampoa owned these shares, which mostly drew their value from their shareholding in the company in India, telecom company in India. You sold these because you sold these, then there has to be a capital gains tax. And that capital gains tax, who has to pay? So the party that is paying, that's Vodafone, has to keep a withholding tax, which means that it's like a TDS, that you have to deduct tax and deposit with the government of India. Vodafone, on the other hand, said, Vodafone and Hutch, that look, we owe no tax to you because we did not do this transaction in India. This transaction was done overseas. It was done overseas in a tax haven like, say, Mauritius. So no tax jurisdiction applies there. These are somebody else's shares. That person is not in India. That company is not in India. It's a foreign company. It's a Hong Kong company or whatever company, not an Indian company. A foreign company has sold its shares to another foreign company in a third foreign country, which is a tax haven. Now, that is, Income Tax Department said that is not right. There cannot be no tax jurisdiction and there cannot be a deal which attracts no tax. So the company contested this. They went to High Court. In the High Court, the company lost the case and Income Tax Department won the case. Now, the company at that point went to the Supreme Court, as you would expect. The Supreme Court in 2012, early 2012, gave a judgment saying that the company was right, that Vodafone was right, that whatever the flaws in the law, I am adding that, whatever the flaws in the law, whatever the imperfections, the law was as it was. And as the law existed at that point, for assets transferred overseas, an overseas company's assets transferred overseas to an overseas company did not attract tax in India. So Income Tax Department lost that case. It was not a small case. The claim, after the assessment, the first assessment in 2007, Income Tax Department has made a claim of 7,990 crores. And you can imagine that with the interest adding up and penalty, this was now going up higher and higher and higher. Now, once the Supreme Court decided on this case, Vodafone and all other investors thought that, oh, India is a country of the laws. Whatever it is, finally we got justice in the Supreme Court of India, even though they ruled against their own government, denying their government several $1 billion of revenue in taxes. So this is a fair country, it's a fair court, and once the Supreme Court has decided, Government of India will accept it. But they ran into somebody called Pranab Mukherjee. Pranab Mukherjee was now the Finance Minister of India. As you know, in 2009, he became Finance Minister of India after Chidambaram was forced to move to Home Ministry following the 26/11 attacks. Now, Pranab Mukherjee is a classical, old-fashioned statist. He believes that the state is supreme. You know what they say in Las Vegas? The house always wins. So, for him, the state always wins in Las Vegas. Some gambler wins, some loses, but you know who doesn't lose? That is the house, that is the casino. So similarly, the state always wins. And Pranab Mukherjee was a believer in that idea. So he got actually quite outraged by this at a moral level. And he said, what the hell is this? Somebody has sold shares to somebody. Somebody has made a profit on selling those shares. Now you are telling me that this has been done in a way that this can be not taxed anywhere. This is in an untaxed jurisdiction. India is not a tax haven. You cannot have a deal in India or linked to India which is tax-free. It will be taxed someplace and I will tax it here. So what he did was, he amended the law, Income Tax Act, retrospectively, because we are the state, we are the sovereign. A sovereign can do anything, right? Sovereign can add 2 plus 2 and say this is 22, or sovereign can add 2 plus 2 and then again pass a law saying it's 2 plus 2 equals 0. I mean, I'm overstating it, but that is how he went it. It's all right, you think that under my current law, I cannot tax you, so I will change my law. All right, you change your law if you found a lacuna in your law, so that in future such deals will not go without being taxed in India. Because what was the sense? The principle was, and the principle is correct, that your assets may be held by a company based overseas, which is selling its shares to another company based overseas. But if the value of those shares basically draws from assets held in India, then India has the right to tax that. So I don't question the principle. It was a good principle. And if he had just made that amendment as of now, going ahead, it was okay. Nobody would fight with him. But what he did was, and this sounded a bit vengeful, कि तुम मेरा law में weakness देख के you went to Supreme Court and you got this order. Who do you think you are? I'm Bharat Sarkar, right? So he changed it retrospectively, and as he changed retrospectively, then Vodafone had no recourse to go anywhere because Supreme Court had already ruled in it. So he essentially used the legislative route to with a back date overturn a Supreme Court decision. That is the moral argument against what he had done that many of us have been writing about. That look, even if you wanted to change the law retrospectively, you should have done, or you could have done after the High Court judgment, which has gone in the Income Tax Department's favor. But when your own country's Supreme Court, which is as much of an equal institution in our division of powers as the executive or as parliament, they have decided on something, you cannot change the law retrospectively. It is like saying, it is the same demand that was made, I'm telling you for simplicity, when this Nirbhaya case people were to be tried and somebody said, oh, one is a juvenile, so change the law for juveniles. So juveniles who are involved in heinous crimes, they should still be treated like adults. So that law went through some amendments, but the demand that that law should also be applied to that juvenile, in that case, that could not be done because you cannot apply the criminal law retrospectively. So that was the question in this case. This is not a criminal case, or it's not a criminal law, but this was applied retrospectively. Now, one after the other, finance ministers after him, Damram came back after him after he became president, and then Modi government's been there for 7 years, and there have been several finance ministers, beginning with Arun Jaitley to now Nirmala Sitharaman, but nobody had dared to change it. So there had to be a reason why nobody was changing it, because everybody thought that, look, this is toxic. The moment I change it, it looked like I am working for corporates and I am denying Bharat Sarkar its due taxes. I know that this is unsustainable. I know that this is causing India a big deal, big image damage, but I have no choice. I will carry on with this. That has now been reversed, and that is why it's an act of strength and courage. 7 years too late. I would have wished if Modi government had come and done it in its very first year. They did not do it, and maybe after that they were also thrown off balance by that Soot Boot Ki Sarkar thing. So they did not want to be seen to be doing anything for the private sector, for that too for MNCs, for the corporate sector, and they were shying, in my view, completely unnecessarily so. That's why so much time has been lost, so much goodwill has been lost. But once again, as I said, I will not be so pessimistic as to say, सब कुछ लुटा के होश में आए तो क्या हुआ? काफी कुछ लुटा के होश में आ गए, फिर भी अच्छा हो गया. Because we always keep saying that the road to disaster is paved with good intentions. But once you figure out that it is the road to disaster, then whatever your intentions, do you still continue going on it into a disaster, or you say, theek hai, my idea was good, I was coming from a good place, but this is leading me to a disaster, so let me now stop and turn around. That is what has happened today with this amendment that has been moved. This is the Taxation Laws Amendment Act 2021. That's come in. What this says is that now this retrospective demand will not be made for any taxation issues settled before 28th of May 2012. That is the day when that year's budget was signed by a Finance Act was signed by the President of India. So anything that was, any demands that were made before that will now go away. And the Finance Secretary explained, and also the explanatory memo with the amendment that's been moved. I was reading that. And my colleague Ramya Nair, who covers business and economy for us, she forwarded it to me. It said that 17 cases have been filed under this retrospective law so far. Of these, 2 are now stayed by the High Court, so they are pending assessment. Of the remaining cases, 4 cases have been taken for arbitration, international arbitration, under the Bilateral Investment Protection Treaty with UK and the Netherlands. And of these, in 2 international arbitration courts have ruled against Government of India in favor of the appellant. That is the Cairn case and the Vodafone case. The Cairn case, as we've been hearing, Cairn has been getting these orders from various courts in the world now to attach India's properties and assets overseas, because Cairn has actually been given quite a sizable compensatory order by the Court of Arbitration. Now the government has said, look, let bygones be bygones. You withdraw your cases, etc. You commit to not pursuing it anywhere else and not to seeking any further compensation. Any tax that has been paid to us, we will refund to you, but without any interest. Bharat Sarkar se interest kahan milta hai aasani se. And any claims that we made on you do not sustain anymore. We will now cancel all those claims. So let's begin life afresh, beginning with 28th of May 2012. That's why I would say it's a big change. Now, why is it that this was so toxic? So I don't have to say it. In fact, the Government of India's own explanatory memorandum with the new amendment says it. So the three things, I'm paraphrasing it, three things it says. One, it took away, it sort of robbed India of the idea that there was tax certainty. Investors like tax certainty. If tax law could be changed 60 years retrospectively, then what certainty? Today, you may be paying this tax. How do you know 10 saal mein kya hoga? Somebody will come and change the law. So that had to be done. Second, it was damaging India's reputation as an attractive investment destination, particularly at a time when post-COVID, India is attracting a lot of foreign FDI and India needs to attract more. And third, because it had now become a sore point with foreign investors, saying that, look, what is your sense of fair play or your respect for the laws if you can always make a law for an occasion or for a case? That simply doesn't work. Now, Pranab Mukherjee, I've had this argument with him, and in fact, I wrote a national interest column headlined Dada Don't Preach. We called him Dada with affection. I greatly respected him and learned a lot from him. But I think he made a big error with this out of sheer belief that the state must always win. So if the state had a law with a lacuna and somebody exploited that lacuna, then instead of admitting to it and then changing the law, you can actually change the law from earlier. So that changes the rules of the game, or that changes the score sheet after a match has been played. Just because, why? Because you have the sovereign power. He was wrong. So I wrote this Dada Don't Preach article. I'll share it with you. After the third volume of his autobiography, The Coalition Years. And in that one, he said, first of all, he said that he refused to accept the finance ministry the first time in 2004 when Sonia offered to him, because he had fundamental ideological differences with Dr. Manmohan Singh, who was more inclined towards free markets and reform, where he says, I was more for a slow, gradual change and a controlled system, quote unquote, he said, controlled system. Then he also went on to say that how his differences with Chidambaram were even sharper than that. So far, so good. Then he explained his amendment, retrospective amendment. And then he said, with some sense, I would say, of vanity, he said that, look, there must be something to this amendment. And he said, when I was bringing in this amendment, this faced opposition. And he mentions the names in his cabinet who opposed it. He said Manmohan Singh opposed it. He said Chidambaram opposed it. He said Kapil Sibal opposed it. He also says that one key colleague of his, one key minister, I presume, even brought a top Vodafone executive to his home to say that, please don't do it, what you're doing is wrong. But he said, I didn't change it because India is not a tax-free jurisdiction. There must be some tax on everything that happened, even if the law has to change from 1961. So then he said, and the reason I say with some vanity, he said that after me, there have been so many finance ministers. Nobody has changed it. He wrote this book in 2017. It's in 5 years, there have been so many finance ministers. Nobody has changed it. Why? There must be something to this amendment. That something was this political fear. That has always bedeviled India's political economy. That, if I do it, people say, that, you are favoring the corporates. You are acting against your own country's revenue interests. Collect this money, get revenue from these ugly, filthy multinationals and distribute it to the poor. Modi government has now gotten over that fear. So to that extent, it's bitten the bullet, and I think it's a very good thing. Now, Kashmir, we'll talk very briefly. I will tell you what has been achieved and what has not been achieved in 2 years. One, Modi government wanted to give an ideological message to its followers. It also wanted to fulfill an ideological and philosophical promise by getting rid of Article 370 and special status for Kashmir, Article 370 and 35A. They've done that, so that's been done for the BJP. Number two, that what was being done slowly. When this happened, I had welcomed the change and I had said that what previous governments were doing slowly, BJP government has done immediately. It was like the example I used was what the previous governments were doing through a process of halal, the Modi government has now done through Jhatka, which means every government was whittling down Article 370 and reducing J&K special status, but BJP then quickly came and immediately, with one stroke of the pen, they completely changed it. So that fait accompli was achieved quite quickly. The third thing that happened was a message was given to Pakistan. And the message to Pakistan was that, look, you keep saying, let's negotiate on Kashmir. So what's there to negotiate on Kashmir? What we have in India is no longer open to negotiation because the status of Jammu and Kashmir is no longer mired in uncertainty. Because as long as the state has a special status, then you, the others, have to say that this is yet to be decided. So the status of Jammu and Kashmir has been decided. So nothing that is with India right now is open for negotiation. You want to negotiate on what you have and which we claim, that is the Pakistan occupied Kashmir. So that clarity was conveyed to Pakistan with the idea that now jo karna hai kar lo. The fourth thing was a message within Kashmir Valley. And message was that, look, there are people who become conflict entrepreneurs over all these years who think somehow that by playing India-Pakistan and by playing this fear in Delhi that Kashmir will go away, on how to win the loyalty of the Kashmiris, you have to buy it, you have to send a lot of money, you have to look the other way, you have to let these dynasties, or whatever. That was taken away. So people of Kashmir were told that, look, there will be no change in the status of Kashmir. What is it that has not been done and what has not been achieved? And what is it that has gone wrong? So one thing that has gone wrong greatly is that the alienation and bitterness has increased very rapidly. So we see very little stone throwing now. Some terror activity goes on, militancy goes on. We see very little of stone throwing and that kind of mass protests, barring the earlier few weeks, if not months. After that, that has not happened. So the situation is calmer on the ground. But if you just scratch the surface a little, people are very angry, resentful. They think they've been betrayed. They think there is no future, but pick up the gun, particularly the young people. So I would commend to you Rahul Pandita's book, very fine book, Lover Boy of Bahawalpur. Please read that book. And one takeaway from that book is that if you look at Jaish-e-Mohammed, which is the most Pakistanized of all terror groups or militant groups in Kashmir Valley, almost 95% of its recruits and its people who are out in the field now are actually local Kashmiris. They are not Pakistanis. The leaders come from Pakistan. One odd comes from Pakistan. One got killed the other day, as we saw, the tall guy. But otherwise, they are all young Kashmiris. So it tells you that beneath this calm, there is a storm brewing. Again, one reason is that government also took away the state's status as a state. First, it took away the autonomy, then the state also, and political process. Government says that, look, we held panchayat elections, which were not being held, which is a good thing. Panchayat elections are held. The state also had some laws which were anti-women. Those have gone away. That's also a good thing. But at the same time, for the state not to have a sense that it's in charge of its own fate, it elects its own leaders, its own rulers, is wrong, and that is unsustainable going ahead. Now, having said that, so those are the things which have not been done. Also, another downside is that this has brought the Chinese next to our borders, because the Chinese move in eastern Ladakh is definitely provoked by changes in Kashmir, Ladakh being made a union territory, and Home Minister Amit Shah saying in Parliament कि एक्साइज चिन्ह हम लेके आएंगे, उसके लिए चाहे अपनी जान दे देंगे. So the Chinese also decided to then give a counter message on their part by just arriving there and refusing to go away. That is still going on. So in the middle of all this, I will also tell you something else. There is a widespread impression that Kashmir needed all these changes because Kashmir was really rotting. Nobody had jobs, nobody had literacy, people were upset that these dynasties were exploiting the people of Kashmir, there was no development, etc., etc. Now, we saw some arguments. We saw one that Omar Abdullah had with the TV anchor where he said, he reeled out figures to say that in this area, Kashmir is doing better than the rest of the country and definitely better than UP and Bihar. But something else caught my eye, and this was some data presented by Central Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment in Parliament during this session. And this is data on free food delivered under the Prime Minister's COVID scheme to the poor. And that data lists what percentage of people in each state are getting that food. That means what percentage of people are below the poverty line in that state with the BPL card, below poverty line card. Now, if you see that, it is quite an eye-opener because the lowest there, the lowest state in all of India, although it's at this point not a state, it's a union territory, but the lowest territory in India for the number of people who are below the poverty line receiving these free rations is Jammu and Kashmir. It's only 5.4%. On the higher side, champions, Bihar 41.4%, Chhattisgarh 40.9%, so 41 ही हो गया ना, Jharkhand 40.3%, Madhya Pradesh 38.3%, Odisha, the champion of all, 46.4%, right? In fact, I called in a tweet, Odisha a poor state, and a lot of people got upset. But look at this, 46.4% people below the poverty line. Uttar Pradesh, 32.8%. Uttarakhand, 39.6%. Karnataka, 25%. West Bengal also about 25%. All India average is 27.5%. Kashmir is 5.4%. I will also tell you other states that are low. Punjab is 8.4%, Himachal Pradesh is 10.4%, Haryana and Delhi are both 14%. Now, Goa is less, but Goa is a very tiny state of just about 17-18 lakh people. So, if you look at all this and you look at the other data, you know that it's not as if Kashmir was doing also badly on most other data. Life expectancy, it's better than the national average and almost 8 years more than, say, Uttar Pradesh. On infant mortality rate, on all these social indicators, Human Development Index, Kashmir is by no means among the basket cases in India. So it is good also to make those fact checks as we go ahead.